I am back at Spirit Falls. It's a great day. It's overcast, cloudy. My legs are jello. I didn't do a lot of the B-roll coming down because it's really steep, and I had to use hiking poles just to make sure I didn't slip. It's a little muddy, and I have some little traction things for my my hiking boots, which help a little bit. But still, it was really impossible to try to hold a vlogging camera, carry your gear, and hike with poles and not slip and fall. So, but I got a little bit. You saw at the very beginning of the video. So this is my first shot here at Spirit Falls. You can kind of see it behind me. It's a nice amount of flow, a little bit of fall color in the back, not a lot, but a little bit. And again, the water is just this fantastic turquoise. It's so pretty. So let me show you my first composition. I've already taken the shots, so I'm just going to walk you through what I did. So here's my composition. I am 16 millimeters, as wide angle as I can go. I will always crop in a little bit. I've got the water exiting over here, bottom right. Got the wonderful, the little white streaks as the water exits. Then I got the waterfall back here in the back with the main plunge pool, and a little bit of fall colors up there at the very top, and then some over here on the left as well. So there's my composition. And what I did was, again, I was talking about shutter speed stacking, because you can't just do one shutter speed when you've got this huge disparity of water flow. This fall here is huge, and you can look down here where it's hitting, and it's just this white mush. That's what's going to happen when you take a long enough shutter speed to make this waterfall over here on the right, which is a lot less, to make that have a little bit of flow to it, little creaminess. It's going to destroy this. In addition to that, right over here on the bottom right, there's not nearly as much water exiting here as it is falling back there. So I am probably looking at least 2 shutter speeds, possibly 3. One for here, one for there, and then one for this gigantic one. So to do this, it's really not hard. You just need to be able to count to 3. That's the easiest way to do it. And what you're going to do in manual mode, you're going to make sure, number one, that whatever exposure you're set, you're not blowing out your highlights in the water. That's the first thing. So whatever that needs to be, like your base setup, consider that, whatever shutter speed it might be. Just don't be blowing out those highlights. And the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to adjust your shutter speed. We'll start on the long end. So what I mean by that, the long shutter speed, I think I was doing a half a second. F11, ISO 100. So that's my longest shutter speed. I'm going to take the shot. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and go 1 stop faster on the shutter speed, so 3 clicks faster, and then we're going to count 3 clicks to adjust for that, because when we go faster on our shutter speed, it's going to take and underexpose the image. Not as much light will get in, so we need to adjust. So we're going to do that with ISO. Okay, so over here's my shutter speed. 1, 2, 3. It got darker, so I'm going to adjust that with my ISO. 1, 2, 3 clicks. ISO 200. Take the shot. I'm going to do that again. 1, 2, 3. ISO 1, 2, 3. I'm at ISO 400. Take the shot. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Take the shot. So I'm going to look at this one that's at a 15th of a second. Go back here. And I don't know if you can see it on the video, but on the back of the camera, I've got detail that I know that I'm going to be able to pull out. And I probably won't use this shot for the water there, but I'm definitely going to use that fast shutter speed for parts of this, like that. But look over here, if we'd have done it for the lower waterfall, not so good. And that's all there is to it. You might have to adjust your aperture if it's too big of a disparity, depending on what your dynamic range is. But I went from a 15th of a second all the way to a half a second, and I went from ISO 100 to 400, and I am positive that out of all of those, I'll be able to pick two or three that are going to get the look of the water. I just checked it, and then when I get back in the office, I'm going to show you how to blend it together. If there's any doubt as to what season it is, I don't know if you can see that in the video, but it's definitely snowing. So I've come down below to get just a couple more photographs, a couple more compositions, I should say, before I head back up the hill. Now, obviously, you don't have to go 3 clicks every time. You can do 1 click or 2 clicks. The point is to always adjust, when you adjust your shutter speed, adjust your ISO to compensate. When you run out of ISO, you would adjust your aperture. And then if you have to get too wide open, then you're going to start worrying about depth of field issues, and that's a topic for another day. All right, the snow's really starting to come down. I've got one more composition I'd like to get before we head back. It could be kind of pretty. I'm not sure how it's going to look out, what it's going to look like, but I'm going to try to get the shot, and then we'll pick this up once we get back in the office. Back in the office from Spirit Falls, and now I'm going to just run through how I blend those images that I took in Photoshop. So we're not talking about blending exposures, we're talking about blending because of shutter speed. So the first thing is that we made sure when we were out in the field that I got the exposure as identical as I could by adjusting and compensating with my ISO when I would change the shutter speed, because again, it was about getting the look in the water that I wanted due to the water flow being different in different parts of the image. So I'm going to take and pull up Lightroom, and I'll show you the different shutter speeds, and then we'll dive into Photoshop, and I'll show you how I blend those images. Here's my first image in Lightroom, and you'll notice up here in the upper left, this is my longest exposure, 1/2 a second. So let's zoom in real quick and take a look. You notice the waterfall back here, I think looks pretty good. I really like the look of this because it wasn't a lot of water flow, and I wanted to have a little bit of that creaminess, that continuation of the water as it came. But if we take a look over at this one, to me, this is just a lot of mush. Now, these images have already been processed. I'm not going to go through how I process the image to get it to this point. We're just talking about blending them in Photoshop to keep the video manageable. So, looking at this part of the water, I know that this is just, I'm not going to use this part, but I'm probably going to use this for sure. If we take a look down here in the bottom right, for this area of where the water is exiting the bottom of the frame, I do kind of like that. So I may not use 3 frames, I might end up just using 2. So let's take a look at the next image. So this is a 1/2 a second. This one goes to a 1/4 of a second. There may not be a lot of difference between this shot and the 1/2 a second photograph. Give it just my slow computer a chance to catch up. And that's why I was saying that, you know, you don't have to do 3 clicks or a full stop between your images. You can just do 1, but the difference is not that great. And so doing it by a stop, 3 clicks that we were talking about in the field, that seems to be a more efficient way of doing it versus doing it like a 1/3 of a stop and taking, you know, 20 images versus just a handful. So again, this is the 1/2 a second. This one, let's go back here to the 1/4 second. If you look up here, you'll notice that this one's starting to look a little bit ragged. And over here, this one's looking a little bit better to me, a little bit more detail here in this part of the image. Now, down in this part was the big part that I was worried about. Didn't want that to be just solid white mush. And this is looking a little bit better as well. Let's go to the next image. This one is going to be an 1/8 of a second, and I'm liking this even better down here in this where it's falling. And let's take a look here. I think this might be getting a little bit too separated, so I'm probably going to use the image before this one for this part of the waterfall, but I do like this extra little streak of the aqua. So I'm probably going to pull that in as well. If you look over here at this shorter waterfall, I'm not liking that at all. I like my very first image the best. And then if I look down here, it's okay. I'm not sold on that. I'll have to be able to compare it a lot faster in Photoshop. I wanted just to give you a brief look of the images before we pulled them into Photoshop. So this is the last one, the fastest. This was a 15th of a second. I don't like this at all. I think this is a little bit too harsh and too much texture, and I'm not a big fan of that. Absolutely do not like this waterfall, the way this one looks. We look over here at this one, I am not liking that. But again, down here, I kind of like that. It's got a lot more detail and a lot more force. You can kind of see the force of that water as it's kind of boiling up. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull all of these into Photoshop. So you can use Command or Control on a Command on a Mac, Control on a PC. Hold it down, and we're going to select the images that we want to import down here in the timeline. We're going to right click on them, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. So I've got my images into Photoshop, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to auto align the images. I want to make sure, even though it was on a tripod, that all of those pixels are as close to being perfectly aligned as possible. So I'm going to select them all, hold the Shift key down, select the first one, hold the Shift, select the last one. They are all selected here in the Layers palette. Go under here under Edit, Auto Align Layers. Auto is fine. You're going to click OK. And Photoshop is going to auto align all of those layers. So there are 4 layers, and I may not use all of them. But you can see how tedious this could be if you had done a third of a stop instead of a full stop, and you covered the same exposure range. You would have, instead of 4, you'd have like 12, or I don't know, 3 times, yeah, you'd have like 12 shots, which is a lot to like try to decide between. So I think 4, again, doing it a stop apart it works for me. Now that we've got them all auto aligned, nothing has really changed. We want to make sure we've got our layers in the right order. So the way that I like to do it is I like to put the, we're going to take a look at it. Let's zoom in here. We're going to look at these images back here in the back. So this is our longest exposure. This is a ½ second, because I can tell by just looking at the water here. And then the next one, by just turning the eye off, this is our 1/8, 5th, or 5th and 8th. This is an 1/8, and then this one is a 16th. This is the fastest, 15th of a second. So as we look at these, now it's time just to decide which ones we're going to keep. I like to put the image that I'm going to use the most of on the bottom. And in this case, I'm going to put my slowest shutter on the very bottom. So I'm going to reorder these by clicking and dragging. So I want the fastest one on the top, and then I want to have the fastest shutter speed next, and then to the longest shutter speed is going to be on the very bottom. And the reason I do that is very important. It makes it easy when we start our masking. So on the 15th of a second, what I know that I'm probably going to use is I look at this, I can zoom in, and I'm looking at just this area here. That was my main focus when I was out at shooting that waterfall, was that this area under here, I did not want to be just this white mass of nothingness. I wanted to have some texture and a little bit of detail in it. So if I turn this off with the eyeball, it's going to show me the layer below it, and that's an 1/8 of a second. And I can decide by looking at this which I like better. Now there's no wrong answer. Art is totally subjective. This is the way that I approach it and the way I do it. If you like that solid whiteness with no detail, then knock yourself out. It's a lot easier just to take one exposure. But for me, it's not, and I wanted to definitely bring in some detail. So that's an 1/8 of a second. If I do that again, that's a 1/4 of a second, and then that is a 1/2 of a second. Now I kind of like the way it looks out here on the rim. As I go back, I don't mind that too much either. I don't think there's enough detail there. Here I'm liking that. I don't like it out here at all. And on a 15th, I'm not digging the way that the water just looks right there. I think I like the 1/8 of a second the best. This one right here, okay? So if I look at the 15th, if I turn it back on, is there any part of it that I want? I don't want to use that. I know I don't want that. I'm not going to use this or that. Let's look down here in the bottom right. I'm not going to use that either. So we're going to turn that off, and we're probably not even going to use that 15th of a second. We're just going to not mess with it. So we're going to go to the 1/8, and we're going to start our masking. Masking is not a difficult concept to understand. Basically, black is going to conceal, and then white is going to reveal. What we're going to do is we're going to hide everything on this layer that we're going to start working on with a black mask. So it's going to be hidden. And then we're going to use a brush in the color white to reveal the sections that we want to show through. And that's the whole concept of a mask. It's really not that hard. So let me show you how easy this is. So we're going to hide this image, this layer, I should say, with a mask, and then we're going to paint in where we want to show. This is the image part that I really like. I like this area right here. I think this looks pretty good. So in order to do that, all we have to do is we're going to hold Alt or Option, and we're going to click on the mask tool down here, making sure that the layer that we want to mask is selected. It's going to create a black mask. Now if you notice that it changed, it hid, this layer is now hidden and not visible. It's still there, it's just hidden. That black mask hides it. So we can disable the mask by holding Shift and clicking. Now that mask is disabled and we can see underneath it. So it's a fast way to see what, to kind of compare what you're doing. We're going to paint with white. Black conceals, white reveals. So we're going to grab our brush tool over here and make sure we're at 100% and 100% flow. And then we'll make sure that we're at white. And all we have to do is make sure the mask is selected, that you're not painting on the layer, that the mask is what is selected over here. And then we're just going to paint. And as you paint in with the mouse, or if you have a tablet and a pen, you can do it that way. I have a tablet, I just don't use it that often. So something like that is what I'm looking at. If I want to see what it looked like without that, I can just basically disable this whole layer and look below it, turn it on, and I can also disable the mask. So that's the mask disabled, and that is the mask as is. So I can paint maybe a little bit more. I don't know how much more I want to go, but this is non-destructive, which is the beauty of using these layer masks. You're not destroying your pixels, you're just masking, and it's easy to revert. If you go too far, and you do something like this, way out here, then all you have to do is hit X, and it will toggle between your foreground and your background colors, black and white, and you go back to black, and you can just paint back over that, and you're right back where you were. You can also see the mask on the screen if you want to do that using the \/ key, and it will show you where you have masked. And all you have to do is, again, to make sure you got everything, is to paint it all back in. So this is the layer right here. This is part of the layer, the mask, that is going to be punched through so that you can see it. Before I move on from this layer, I want to pull in just a little bit. There was some of this great aqua color in this waterfall, this main fall back here. So in order to see it, I can just disable the mask. And you see this little bit of aqua. I want to pull that in because I like that in the image. So what I'll do is make sure I am painting with white with my brush. I'll make my brush a little bit smaller using the bracket keys. And I'm just going to paint in where that nice color was, just like that. Like that. And I really, really like having that little streak of color that goes down that entire waterfall. So now we're going to move on to the next layer. And in this layer, it's not going to be about this over here, because again, I'm going to use this final layer here the longest exposure for that part of the waterfall. So now I'm going to be looking down in here. So I've looked at it a little bit more, and I do like this right here in the mid ground of the water. I like it better than this. There's not really a lot of texture here, and when I put this in, I like the white. I think it just adds just a little bit. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to hit the Alt or Option key, click the mask tool, and we're going to put a black mask on this layer as well. Then we're going to paint with white, select our brush, make our brush a little bit bigger, and then we're just going to paint. And see how we're bringing in that white detail right in there. And to me, that just adds a little bit more to the image. I like that. If I disable this layer, you can see that this is not as interesting, in my opinion, than this. I like this little bit of white texture here in the water versus that. I like all of the rest pretty well. So just a very, very quick recap. We've got our 3 layers with 3 different exposures. We got a black mask on 2 of them that's hiding the layer, and then I'm just painting with white in the areas that I want to create, that are to make visible. Let me zoom out here. You can see the entire image, and then I'm going to pull these off. You can notice the difference is going to happen when I hide that layer. You can see it right here. So there's this layer on with a layer mask applied. This one here, I'm going to turn it off. You're going to notice the difference down in this area right in here. And I added this nice little bit of texture here. And then this is the final image, is the top layer that I merged down. So once I've got all this done, all I need to do is go under File, Save. It's going to save the file, and then it'll bring it back into Lightroom. So we're going to go over to Lightroom, make a final adjustment, and we'll be done. We're back in Lightroom. We're going to make just a couple of last edits to the photograph, and then we're going to be done. So one thing I'm looking at this is it does need to be cropped. Remember, I always say you want to shoot a little wide when you're out, and that way you can always crop. You can never add those pixels back, but it allows you to crop in a little bit. I think there's a little bit of the waterfall could be brought a little bit more front and center. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here to the crop tool, and I'm just going to bring it in, and I've got my rule of thirds kind of up here, and I'm kind of digging on this. I want to make sure that I keep this fall color in the back. I think that is really, really important. I like that a lot. So I'm thinking something along these, somewhere around in here. And let's try this. We're going to try, instead of original, let's go with a 4x5 crop. Yes, I'm thinking I like that even better, because that allows me to make just a little bit bigger here, and it's killing off just all of this stuff that's just not quite as interesting. Like that. So there's the image. We're going to zoom in real quick. Notice I've got nice flow here in my water on this little, the smaller waterfall. The big one looks nice. I've got that streak of aqua color that comes all the way down. I've got texture and detail in the plunge pool, and down here in the water all the way, you know, to this rock. And then down in my bottom right, I've got the look of the water that I want there. And in the end, I used 3 images. I used the 1/4 second, the 1/2 second, and the 1/8 second shot to pull together and then do the masking. So I hope you liked the video. Hope you got something out of it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.